More than 4,000 years ago, a civilization larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined built cities with drainage systems more advanced than many medieval European towns. And yet, to this day, we still cannot read a single word they left behind. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, flourished roughly between 2600 and 1900 BCE, spanning what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, a territory estimated at over 1.25 million square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia combined. It was one of the three great early river civilizations of humanity, alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet it remains far less well known than the other two, largely for a reason we'll get to in a moment. Cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa reveal a level of urban planning that was remarkably advanced for their time. Streets laid out on a precise grid system running in straight perpendicular lines, covered drainage channels running along most streets, carrying wastewater away from individual homes, a technology many European cities wouldn't achieve until more than 3,000 years later. A massive public bathing structure at Mohenjo-daro, known as the Great Bath, built with precisely fitted, waterproofed baked bricks. A standardized system of weights and measures, crafted with astonishing precision, pointing to a highly organized trade economy. Thousands of small stone seals carved with animal motifs and a system of symbols that remains undeciphered to this day, used in trade transactions, including with merchants as far away as Mesopotamia, where records mention a trading partner called Meluha, which many scholars believe refers to the Indus region itself. But unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where we can read hieroglyphics or cuneiform to learn about their kings, religion, and laws, the Indus script, made up of roughly 400 to 450 distinct symbols, remains completely undeciphered to this day, despite hundreds of serious research attempts spanning more than a century. No one even knows for certain whether it represents a full language or merely a system of symbolic notation. Then, around 1900 BCE, these great cities began to decline, and their populations gradually abandoned the major urban centers. So what actually happened? This is the theory most strongly supported by recent paleoclimate research. Sediment analysis from Kotla Dahar Lake in Rajasthan, combined with oxygen isotope data from ancient specimens such as freshwater snail shells, shows that South Asia experienced a period of weakening monsoon rainfall lasting for centuries, beginning around 2200 to 2000 BCE. A shift researchers have linked to broader global climate patterns, affecting multiple ancient civilizations around the same time, including the roughly contemporaneous decline of the Old Kingdom in Egypt and the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia. Harappan agriculture depends heavily on stable monsoon rainfall to irrigate crops across the floodplains, particularly wheat and barley. As the monsoon weakened and became increasingly unpredictable, agricultural yields dropped significantly, gradually undermining the ability of large, densely populated cities to feed themselves. A slow, grinding process unfolding over generations, rather than a single sudden catastrophe. Some researchers argue this climatic shift is the single strongest common thread connecting nearly every other theory on this list. Interestingly, more than 90% of known archaeological sites from the Indus civilization are not found along the Indus River itself, but along the ancient bed of the Ghaggar-Hakra River, which many scholars believe corresponds to the legendary Sarasvati River mentioned repeatedly in the ancient Rigveda texts of India as a once mighty, now vanished waterway. Satellite imagery and paleochannel studies show that the Ghaggar-Hakra was once a major perennial river, fed by glacial tributaries flowing down from the Himalayas. But due to tectonic shifts in the region, key tributaries such as the Sutlej and Yamuna rivers gradually changed course over centuries, breaking away from the Ghaggar-Hakra system to flow into entirely different river basins, the Indus and the Ganges, respectively. Once it lost its primary glacial water source, the river slowly transformed from a mighty channel into a seasonal, monsoon-fed stream, and eventually dried up almost entirely, forcing the many densely settled communities that depended on it to relocate or abandon their cities altogether. The Harappan economy thrived in part thanks to a long-distance trade network with Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf region, exchanging turquoise, semi-precious stones, ivory, and textiles for silver, tin, and other goods carried by sea and overland caravan routes. Mesopotamian cuneiform records referencing trade with Meluha gradually decline in frequency and then disappear entirely from the archive around 1900 BCE, precisely the same period the major Indus cities began to decline. Combined with mounting climate and water supply pressures, the collapse of these trade networks may have delivered an additional severe economic blow to a civilization already under strain. Archaeologists have identified a period known as the Late Harappan Phase, during which populations from major cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa gradually dispersed into thousands of smaller agricultural villages. Use of the standardized weights and the Indus script on artifacts became increasingly rare, and large-scale urban construction projects, including new drainage systems and public buildings, effectively ceased altogether. For much of the 20th century, a popular theory, first proposed by Sir Mortimer Wheeler, the very archaeologist who excavated Mohenjo-daro in the 1940s, held that the Indus civilization was violently destroyed by an invasion of Aryan peoples migrating from Central Asia, based on a small number of scattered skeletons found in the uppermost layers of Mohenjo-daro, which Wheeler famously described as victims of a final massacre. However, modern archaeological and genetic research has almost entirely discredited this theory. The number of skeletons found was far too small to indicate a large-scale massacre. There was no evidence of weapons, burned structures, or warfare at the site, and crucially, the dating of these remains does not actually align with the timing of civilization's decline. Some skeletons were later found to predate the supposed invasion entirely. Modern genetic studies, drawing on ancient DNA extracted from Harappan-era burial sites, now show that the migration of Indo-European language speakers, ancestors of the Sanskrit language, into the Indian subcontinent happened gradually, over many centuries, and largely without large-scale violence, heresy occurring well after the Indus cities had already declined due to climate and economic pressures, rather than being the direct cause of the collapse itself. A common misconception worth correcting: the Indus civilization was not wiped out in a single catastrophic event. This was a gradual decline unfolding over several centuries, not a sudden collapse. As the major cities weakened, most of the population didn't disappear. They gradually migrated eastward and southward, toward more fertile land along the Ganges River, a region that would later become the cradle of subsequent Indian civilizations. Many scholars believe that certain cultural, religious, and technical elements of Harappan society were carried forward and blended into these later Indian civilizations, although the exact nature of that connection is still an active area of research. So what really happened to the Indus civilization? The scientific evidence today points to a story of failed adaptation in the face of climate change, rather than the violent invasion once widely believed for decades. A weakening monsoon, the slow drying of the river that had sustained the entire civilization, and the collapse of long-distance trade networks together forced one of the most advanced urban civilizations of the ancient world to gradually dissolve into smaller, scattered communities. But one mystery remains completely untouched by any of this research until the Indus script, with its more than 400 enigmatic symbols, is finally deciphered. We will never get to hear the Harappan people tell their own story in their own words. Which factor do you think played the biggest role in the decline of the Indus civilization? Climate, the drying river, or the trade collapse? And do you think humanity will ever manage to decipher this mysterious script? Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next historical mystery. See you in the next one.